made courses outdoors and then filming them for your viewing pleasure. There's an expert commentary to help navigate where each marble is at. Have a listen to this.
There is a look at your course. Marbles in the blocks, and they're off. Comet taking the early lead over the Flash. Then it's Reflector, Mocha Madness, Tarantula. Reflector up into second now, Mocha Madness. There's Deep Ocean flying up into second place. That very deep blue marble, appropriately named, loses out second place to Reflector as I say that, but it's still Comet out in the lead. Is anybody going to take that outside line? It looks like the Flash does, but that may actually be a slower pathway, it looks like, for him. He's going to lose several spots. Deep Ocean now up into second place, seeing if he can track down that light blue Comet up ahead as they snake through the S's.
And coming through the bag is Beetleborgs.
So I went into a very deep rabbit hole looking at marble racing last night.
You didn't.
And that particular race I've watched, and actually it gets really gripping at the end.
Seriously, you have first-hand experience of that race.
Yeah.
Alexia Russell.
It goes through this homemade kind of mud track, and some of them go down one side and the other, and they overtake each other, and it's really... They do it very well.
Okay.
Well, I watched cat cricket last night.
Oh, is this the one where they put the cat in the box and a ping pong ball?
The ping pong ball, and the cat plays some lovely strokes away on the onside. And
break this down for me, because I do not have any idea what you're talking about.
The cat was in a box.
Yes.
Cute black cat, really cute one.
Yeah, and sort of looking forward, and the person was rolling a ping pong ball towards it, and as the ball got nearer the cat, it would lean out and whack it away. And as I say, played some very nice shots on the onside. But I think there were huge possibilities. I watched it for a reasonable period of time.
I'm worried about both of you so much now.
Well, this is one positive thing, that we're going to be so stuck without anything to do that we're going to invent all these. Can I
just say the word podcast to you people? We're making lovely podcasts for you to listen to. But you don't have to watch cats play cricket in a box.
Yeah. On a more serious note, though, we've got a wealth of material of various sporting fixtures of the recent and not so recent past in television libraries. We could easily replay those. There'd be a lot of people who'd like to see some great moments of New Zealand sport again, I'm sure.
We can watch the netball, which is still on.
The netball's still on. It's about the only one that still is, though, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes.
What else do you plan to do with your quiet hours now that you're not allowed to go out so much? Anything else on the... is all those books you've been planning to read, all those podcasts you've been planning to listen to?
No, I'm saving up the lawns. I'm just watching them grow and grow in case I'm put into isolation and I can mow them in one big satisfying hit. I'm not weeding the garden in case I have to spend many hours out there.
Peter, actually, look, we've got 1 minute before we hand over to Checkpoint. So I just want to ask you one quick question, because we blurred through it before. $25 a week benefit increase. As I say, as we mentioned then, this would be, a huge story of a week or a couple of weeks play in any other time. This matches what the National-led government that you were part of did in 2015. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think it is a big move, and that's why I think, as I said, I'm sure this was intended to be a budget move, but they've brought it forward now, partly to keep the Greens on side, but perhaps more seriously, it might have been a little harder in a month's time. They may have had other more pressing calls on their funding, but good on them for doing it now.
Yeah, right move, do you think?
Oh, well, I think there'll be a large number of people who'll say yes. The beneficiaries will welcome it. Whether it's a critical part of a COVID-19 package, I think, is a bit of a question mark.
Fair point. All right, we're handing over to Lisa Owen and the Checkpoint team, who'll be unpacking again the economic package from the government today and all the rest of today's news.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the biggest economic plan in New Zealand's post-war history, $12.1 billion to ease the economic burn of COVID-19. Big ticket items include a more than $5 billion wage subsidy package and an isolation fund. Some businesses are down 95%. Who will get what, and will it keep them afloat? A boost for winter energy bills and a bump for beneficiaries, $25 extra bucks a week, but some say it's not enough. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, is live. 3 more COVID cases are confirmed, all returning from overseas travel. And our expert panel analyses the rescue package from every angle.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government's COVID-19 rescue package is being described as an extraordinary, unprecedented boost to the economy. Its $12.1 billion package includes wage subsidies, sick leave support and a boost to benefits. It comes as health officials reveal 3 more cases of the disease, taking the total to 11. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Economist Shamabil Yaqub has described the package as absolutely fantastic. He says it represents 4% of GDP, making it bigger than what any other country has put forward. Mr Yaqub says things like the boost to benefits will go a long way towards reducing the impact the inevitable recession will have on real people. He says the $5 billion wage subsidy scheme will help preserve jobs and avoid business failures. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
The tourism industry says the relief package will help operators cope with a devastating downturn. Spokesman Chris Roberts says some jobs will be saved, but many will still be lost. He expects hundreds of businesses to apply for the wage subsidy on offer to those who can show a 30% drop in revenue. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the 3 new COVID-19 cases have all recently returned from overseas. 2 are a father in his 70s and his son in his 30s from Wellington, who were in the United States. The other case is a Dunedin man in his 40s who has just returned from Germany. Dr Bloomfield says more cases of COVID-19 are expected.
All our cases to date are associated with international travel, and as over the last 2 weeks we have seen a big increase in the number of countries overseas with cases, we will expect more travellers returning to New Zealand to present with symptoms of COVID-19 and they will be tested.
Ashley Bloomfield says the best protection is the 14-day self-isolation. A tourist is expected to be deported because she is refusing to go into self-isolation. From 1 o'clock yesterday morning, everyone who arrives in the country has to isolate themselves for 14 days. However, Dr Bloomfield says the woman has so far refused and plans to continue her holiday. He says she is likely to be deported. The Prime Minister is defending the decision to include an across-the-board boost in benefits. National is criticising the boost to benefits, accusing the government of having its priorities wrong. But Jacinda Ardern says the boost in the winter energy payment is a practical step to keep the country's most vulnerable well this winter. She says Australia also gave a cash injection to beneficiaries.
If you want to stimulate economy, you give extra support to those on the lowest incomes because they have a lower income. They spend it. And that is what our economy needs right now, Mr Speaker. It is a known tool.
Jacinda Ardern. The New Zealand stock market has clawed its way back from a drop of about 5% in early trading to end the day down 0.4%. The local market followed the ASX 200 up early on after Australia's near 10% drop yesterday, its worst day since 1987. Wall Street also had its worst session since the global financial crisis, with all the main indices down about 12%. Back home, travel and tourism-related companies remain under pressure, while Air New Zealand is still in a trading halt. A Pike River family member says he feels betrayed by a decision not to re-enter the main workings of the mine. The announcement was made today, along with an extra $11 million to complete recovery of the main entry tunnel by July or August. This means the cost of finding the cause of the explosion and the bodies of the 29 men who died has doubled to $47 million. Bernie Monk has battled for nearly a decade to get his son Michael back and to see somebody held accountable. For him, the news that no assessment will be made of whether the main workings of the mine can be entered means his battle is a long way from finished.
How can they make this call when the whole idea was to go down the 800 metres that's never been investigated, make a call before we even get there?
Bernie Monk. Immigration New Zealand is praising the courage of the 13 Samoan victims of slavery for speaking out about their treatment at the hands of their chief. 65-year-old Hastings resident Joseph Aonga Matamata has been found guilty of 10 charges of human trafficking and 13 of dealing in slaves, following a 5-week trial at the High Court in Napier. He was acquitted on 1 charge of trafficking. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. In sport, the New Zealand Warriors are in the market for loan players as they move ahead with the National Rugby League season. With just 19 of their top 30 players currently available in Australia, the Warriors are looking to pick up players from other NRL clubs to bolster their squad. But Warriors Chief Executive Cameron George is not expecting other clubs will be too generous.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, but if you're a club and you're happy to help out, you're not going to throw anyone out of your top bunch at us. So, and the players that we'll be dealing with will be ones on the fringe that aren't playing NRL. And then the other interesting thing that's happening in the next 24 hours is for the game is what's going to happen to the New South Wales Cup competitions and the Queensland Cup competitions. They might be suspended from now for a period of time. So that might present a number of players that we could look at.
Cameron George. The New Zealand Open Swimming Championships, which are an Olympic qualifying event, have been postponed until early June. That's the news.
Coronavirus cases surge in Europe.
The epidemic in France is very worrying. It's getting worse very quickly. We see the number of cases doubling every 3 days now.
Markets plunge as countries lock down.
When markets open for trading, within minutes we hit that 7% threshold and markets stopped trading for about 15 minutes.
In Italy, the death toll mounts, but they've turned to music to raise their spirits.
Your trusted source of news, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Kapiti Coast, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Becoming fine tonight. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington. Cloudy with a few showers. Showers clearing from the south tomorrow and fine spells increasing. Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine. A few showers about the Kaikoura coast, clearing early tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow morning and a few showers developing. Canterbury mostly cloudy with occasional showers clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland becoming fine. Chatham Islands cloudy, a chance of a shower this evening. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The government has today administered the economy an unprecedented $12.1 billion shot to help those hit hard by the COVID-19 epidemic. In what it calls the largest peacetime economic plan in New Zealand's modern history, the package is more than all of this government's new operating spending across 3 budgets combined. It includes wage subsidies of $5.1 billion, which for employers means $585 a week for full-time staff and $350 a week for part-time staff, capped at $150,000 per business. And there's also $126 million set aside for a self-isolation support package. There'll also be a bump for benefits. There's $500 million set aside for health too. Checkpoint will be staying on air until 7 o'clock tonight for analysis of today's announcement. After 6, we'll be joined by Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens, First Union's Tali Williams and business consultant Phil O'Reilly. We'll also hear throughout the programme from businesses and employees across New Zealand. But first, let's speak to the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, who joins us now live from our gallery studio. Good evening, Minister. How many jobs do you think this will save?
Oh, look, I hope it saves plenty. The reality, though, is that none of us can actually answer that question at this stage. What particularly the wage subsidy package is about is giving employers time to readjust to the new normal that we're in, to make sure that they can keep staff in place. But the answer directly to that question is just not one that anyone can give. We do know that New Zealanders will lose their jobs as a result of this coronavirus situation. What we have tried to do today is cushion the blow of that.
What are the experts telling you about how many job losses to expect?
Look, again, the advice that we've had is that the impact of this overall coronavirus will be worse than the global financial crisis. In the global financial crisis, unemployment reached around 6.7%. We're at 4% at the moment, so you can start to do the maths there. But I'm loath to give a number when I simply don't have that information.
So best case scenario, you really just, and you've used these words, looking to cushion the blow, aren't you? Not prevent it.
Indeed, and got to be straight up with New Zealanders here. Every sector of the economy is going to be affected by this. Because we don't know how long the impacts of the virus are going to last, it's very difficult to say exactly what that impact will be. But what we're saying to New Zealanders today is that we are here, and it's not just the wage subsidy, Lisa, it's also the tax changes we've made, it's also the changes to benefits and the winter energy payment and so on. So we've got a package here, and it's not the end of the road in terms of government support either. We have the budget coming, which I've said will be a recovery budget, and I also reserve the right to be able to do more things between now and then as they're needed.
Do you anticipate you will have to do something before the budget?
There may be some instances where we do need to. We know that there are some large and complex businesses in New Zealand where clearly our wage subsidy scheme is not going to be able to help them. They will be in conversations with their banks as we speak. We in turn are in conversation with the banks as well.
What kind of businesses are you talking about, Minister?
Oh, well, there are large, when you've got a $150,000 cap, clearly for, businesses with a large number of employees, that is not going to be enough for them. We want to be able to work alongside those. Their first port of call will be their bank, obviously, but this is going to affect every part of the economy.
Looking at that isolation fund, I was interested in the detail there. So it's based on 27,000 workers being in isolation for every 2-week cycle for 8 weeks. You're talking about 100,000 plus workers. Is that the worst case scenario?
Potentially, yes. I mean, as in all of these schemes, what we've set out here to do is set some criteria, and then we have to ask officials who have been working round the clock over the last couple of weeks to come up with an estimate of the number of people. It would be fair to say that those estimates have had to be fairly rough and ready. The point here is the criteria of the scheme is clear. If people meet it, then the money will be paid out.
But the 100,000 plus workers potentially going into isolation is the middle ground, isn't it? Because you have said in that document it could go higher.
Well, exactly. And the point is we don't know exactly. What we're saying is here is the criteria for a scheme. And I guess what really has concerned us here is that there are a group of workers for whom they won't be able to necessarily self-isolate easily, particularly for economic terms. Some people who may be asked to self-isolate, they might think, well, can I actually do that? Can I afford that? It's those people for whom the scheme is aimed at.
Okay, so the wage subsidy package, where does that leave, say, as a real example, a taxi driver who spends 7 hours at the airport in a single day waiting for one fare? Is he or she covered?
Yes.
And so they would just make an application, as a sole trader?
Absolutely. Sole traders and self-employed are covered. And in fact, the very people we're worried about here in many cases are those people. The vast majority of New Zealand businesses, the only employee is the sole trader. And so we have organised both the wage subsidy scheme and the provisions around self-isolation to include them.
So where is this 12.1 billion coming from? Is any of it repurposed? Is it all new and borrowed?
All new, and yes, we have issued government bonds today in order to be able to do that. That's exactly what we always do. It's the normal debt instrument.
And what are you anticipating in terms of your debt level? How high could they go? How high could they go?
Yeah, look, it's very, I said today we will definitely go beyond the 15 to 25% target that we have. We always said in our budget responsibility rules that they were caveated by whether there was a global economic shock. That is clearly what is happening now.
So what are you comfortable with, though? So during the global financial crisis, it was up around the 30 mark. So what would you be comfortable with? Going that high? Going higher?
Look, I'm not really in a position, again, because of the uncertain times that we're in, to give a specific answer. But what I said today is it is my full expectation we will go above that 25%.
So what happens in 12 weeks' time? Because that's the package duration, isn't it? How long
for
you
the wage subsidy?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Look, we are constantly reviewing this on a day-by-day basis, and I think you and the listeners will understand that things have moved very fast, and they will continue to move relatively fast. The 12 weeks means we've given certainty. We'll continue to look at what is possible and what is needed as we go.
But what are you being told about how long this potentially will last?
Well, I'm being told the same thing that everybody else is, which is that it is very, very uncertain. Clearly, the arc of things that we've seen overseas is New Zealand will have more cases. That is inevitable. The work that we're doing in terms of the border restrictions, in terms of our public health campaigns, is, as I'm sure you've heard, about smoothing the curve. That means if we do that, the impact may be less and last for a little less long than it would if it was a spike. But those are public health matters. What I have done today is announced a package to cushion the blow, to allow businesses to readjust and work with their employees. But there are going to be some tough times ahead, Lisa.
So initially you were saying short, sharp shock, 6 months, right? So did you underestimate this?
No, I don't. I was working on the advice that everybody around the world was, and I was very clear at the time. The reason why I outlined 3 scenarios was because if containment didn't work, we were going to move rapidly through the second and third scenarios. What we've seen
where are we now, Minister? In terms of your scenarios, what are you working on?
We're in the third scenario, Lisa, because right around
global
the world...
recession.
We're in the third scenario because right around the world, countries are literally shutting down. If you go into Europe now, people are being told to stay home where there are large community outbreaks. We are fortunate we do not have one of those at the moment. That's why we've taken the drastic decisions we have around things like border restrictions so that we can do our best not to have that community outbreak. But in terms of the global economy, you don't have whole countries shut down and not have that significant downturn.
And I know finance ministers in particular do not like these words, but can you be clear with me? Are you working on a scenario of a global recession, or are you talking about a depression?
At the moment we're working on the scenario of a global recession.
Are you working on a fourth scenario though?
Look, at this stage we're working on the package we got out today. We managed to put that out inside a week. We continue to monitor things constantly, and as I said, the budget is really the next phase of substantially of our recovery package.
What's going to happen with Air New Zealand? You're the shareholding minister. What do you anticipate will need to happen there?
So as Air New Zealand has publicly stated, they are in conversations with the government. I am the shareholding minister, and unfortunately I'm not able to go into that for legal reasons.
So dividend? Are you likely
to
waive?
They've already said that they wouldn't be issuing dividends.
Okay, so what does this all mean for your budget? Does the government's priorities still remain the same? Like, eradicating child poverty, building houses. Where does this put you big picture?
Yeah, look, that's exactly the process we're now going through. Obviously, when you're putting a budget together, we'd reached the point where we had made a number of firm decisions. I've now asked ministers to go back and look at all of them to make sure that we have a budget that is aligned to the recovery around COVID-19. But quite clearly, making sure we lift children out of poverty, making sure that we build houses, making sure that we look after our families, those are important things in any time, and we will continue to pursue those objectives because actually they're part of helping New Zealand recover.
Okay, so the 500 million that is earmarked to go into health resources, how is that going to be distributed? And who makes those decisions?
So, well, obviously the Ministry of Health, working alongside district health boards and working alongside regional public health and working alongside GPs. There's an awful lot of detail, Lisa, in that package that's been released today. The big focus, obviously, is on making sure that we do the core things that are needed at the moment. So that's the testing, that's the tracing, that's the public health campaigns, that's the support for public health staff, for Healthline, that's the support for DHB staff.
What about medication?
All of that's there and ready to go.
What about medication? Because obviously there are advances. People are working on this. Does this money, is part of this money set aside in case there is some kind of medicine that could be used in the fight against this?
That'll come further down the track, and what I've said to the Minister of Health, and I said it on Radio New Zealand very early on, is we will do what it takes when it comes to healthcare. Those issues around vaccines and medicines are some way down the track.
Just before you go, we are being told, well, maybe we'd like to take a holiday in New Zealand. The economy could use a boost. School holidays come around. Do you want us travelling the length and breadth of New Zealand or not?
Yeah, look, I mean, we do want people to spend money in the New Zealand economy. Where we are right now, everyone will be aware of the rules around mass gatherings and the rules around social distancing. People should be able to, do things like go on holiday, but obviously this is a day-by-day situation, and we certainly want people to keep spending. Buy local would be my best advice today, Lisa.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Finance Minister Grant Robertson joining us live from our studio in the gallery. It is 19 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on that. If you're a worker or a business owner, let us know your thoughts. Is this enough? Will you benefit from us? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The economic package to support the growing effects of the COVID-19 virus has been welcomed by the business community. Andrew McRae reports.
Business New Zealand is describing the economic package as a significant response to a set of challenging economic circumstances. Chief Executive Kirk Hope says the government has provided all Business New Zealand asked for, and in some cases more.
This is a really substantial signal from the government that they are willing to spend money to support the New Zealand economy and New Zealand businesses.
He says businesses needing to apply for wage subsidies will find it relatively easy and won't get bogged down in red tape.
They'll have to answer a number of questions, not that many, and they'll have to make a declaration that what they're saying is true and correct, and then they will be contacted with payment options and opportunities.
Kirk Hope says the wage and leave subsidies should be enough to support workers in the meantime.
I actually think that they're substantial enough to be able to support businesses in the near term, and again there's some other fiscal stimulus that the government had already announced, and some of which they will no doubt bring forward. They also indicated that there may be more to come.
The Council of Trade Unions says the package provides an immediate boost to help workers get through the uncertainty of what's ahead for them. President Richard Wagstaff says it's pleasing the package contains a $500 million boost to health services to help fight the pandemic.
But we're also really pleased to see the money going towards supporting workers to take sick leave and to take self-isolation leave, if you like. And that going not just to full-time paid employees, but actually to contractors and casuals as well.
Mr Wagstaff says regardless of the economic package, it won't save all jobs.
There is definitely going to be some negative consequences for workers and firms. It's not going to save everybody, but hopefully it will make a big difference. But there's a real sense that we're in this together as a nation. Everyone needs to do their bit.
Ellie Boswick is Chief Executive of the Nelson Chamber of Commerce. She says while all of the country is feeling the economic effects of COVID-19, it's harder in smaller centres.
Anything that can keep cash in people's businesses will be incredibly welcome. How that actually sort of manifests itself as we go through the detail of this obviously remains to be seen, but on face value it's obviously looking at trying to keep as much cash in businesses as possible, and that's something that we would support.
With airlines struggling to survive the COVID-19 crisis, the government's announcement of $600 million to support the aviation sector is being welcomed with open arms. The Executive Director of the Board of Airline Representatives, Justin Tyumbers, says the package will be a lifeline.
There's an immediate risk is about securing the people and services that are going to be needed to keep our aviation system running. Cash liquidity in the sector at the moment is a major concern as you see demand dry up for flights. The $600 million package will provide a much-needed shot in the arm.
He expects the money to be spread across the sector.
Across airports, border agencies, airways, all of those costs that go into running a flight.
Mr Tyumbers says it's not just Air New Zealand feeling the pinch, as commuter airlines are also suffering. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae Tene.
Businesses in Wellington are welcoming the support package. Iko Gift Shop on Cuba Street has seen a sharp decline in foot traffic over the past couple of days. Co-owner Rose Bollinger told our reporter Logan Church she's glad help is now available.
I think it's pretty helpful knowing we're going to have some help with our wage subsidies. We were already looking into allocating extra sick leave for staff, so knowing that that will be helped with is pretty useful. Yeah.
And how exactly has your business been impacted so far?
We've definitely seen a decline since about Friday in trade. I think customers are feeling a little spooked maybe and not sure whether to go out or not. So, but only time will tell really.
And what's the sort of mood along Cuba Street? There are a lot of businesses down here. Are others feeling the same as you?
I'd say so. I think people are feeling a little like it's a bit of an unknown at the moment. I know that, trade is probably down around the area. I know our dear friends, Milk Crate around the corner, have had to close with a precinct attached, a design store. So, that can't be good. Yeah.
And up the road, Mexican restaurant Viva Mexico Left Bank is empty. Not a single person came for lunch. Its owner, Luis Guajardo, told Logan Church he's worried this is the new norm for his business. It employs 6 full-time staff and 2 part-timers.
As you can see, it's completely quiet, dead. We haven't received a single customer today. Nothing much to worry about it yet, because normally in this restaurant, lunch is not really the busiest time of the day. Hopefully we get a little bit better during dinner, but yeah.
Are you worried about it though?
Yes, of course, we all are. Because it's a small restaurant, but at the same time, it's 7 people depending on this. It's not much we have a lot of staff or whatever, but they all depend on this restaurant, so we're hoping for the best.
Wage subsidies will be available for hard-hit businesses. Employers will be paid $585 per week for full-time staff and $350 for part-time staff. Paul Fuimoano runs Toru Tours, an Auckland tour company. He told our reporter Nita Blake-Person meeting the threshold of a 30% drop in business won't be hard.
I guess in actual numbers, we've had a 95% drop in numbers. Essentially, this could be the last tour of Auckland that we do today. 585 is better than 0.
Will it be enough for people to make mortgage repayments? And is it a big drop, do you think?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. So with the house prices at $1 million in Auckland, it's not going to be anywhere near enough. If you've got a mortgage free, you're going to be able to survive just. Possibly if you're really reining all your budgets. So, everybody's situations are going to be totally different.
And Fred Andrews turned 65 last year. He will be among the thousands of superannuitants whose winter energy payment was doubled in today's announcement from $700 to $1,400. His income went up significantly last year when he went from the benefit to the super, but he's aware of those who are still struggling.
I think the government have done a great job so far, but honestly, my concern is for other senior citizens like me, the homeless, and the people who have disabilities. We are the ones who are going to struggle. It's still not enough, I don't think. My concern is for the homeless, the people, and by homeless I mean the people who are living in overcrowded houses, people who are sleeping on couches because they can't find their own accommodation. They're struggling, and they're going to continue to struggle like I do.
In Auckland, taxi drivers at the airport told our reporter Katie Doyle no tourists meant no certainty.
It is affecting a lot. 2 fares is really nothing. And you never know, maybe someone will come and just ask me to go to the Ibis Budget Hotel. That will be $20. That's the minimum dollar fare. And I have waited for 4 hours or 5 hours. And out of that, I paid $5 to the airport and I make $50. That's even you can assume what's the minimum wage in New Zealand, that's $17.70. And even if you pay the rent of the tax after that, you get around maybe $13.50 or something. So you work for 5 hours and you get out $15.
How has the virus affected your business?
You could say it has killed it. Because there's no certainty in how long you have to wait and what happens, Since Sunday we have seen, we've been waiting for about at least 4 or 5 hours before we get a job. And previously we'd do at least, from the airport itself, we'll do about 4 to 5 jobs in a day. But right now we're just struggling to do 2.
We have to wait in a queue in 3 to 4 hours to get the job, and nobody is coming through the flights. So we are affecting a lot due to this virus.
Do you worry when people come out and you're taking them to essentially self-isolate? Is that a concern for you?
Yes, of course, everybody. everybody gets scared, but everybody has to make some money to fulfill the requirements.
Looking at the circumstances that everybody is in, any help would be good, But whether that is sufficient is another issue, It's only the first week, but you are worried, what will happen, how long this continues. Because we do need income to, survive and pay all the bills. The mortgage is the biggest issue I think we will have.
And that is taxi drivers at Auckland Airport talking to our reporter Katie Doyle. There are 3 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 11, along with 2 probable cases. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the infected people have all recently returned from overseas. 2 of the cases are in Wellington, a father in his 70s and his son in his 30s, who have recently returned from the United States and are now in self-isolation.
The man in his 30s became unwell on the flight, and his father became unwell the day after they arrived in New Zealand. Neither of these men require hospital care and are both recovering at home. They travelled on American Airlines flight AA83 from Los Angeles to Auckland, arriving in on Saturday the 14th of March. The relevant seats they were in on that flight are seats 4A and 10H. They then travelled to Wellington on Air New Zealand flight NZ419 that same day, and they were in seat numbers 1B and 1C.
Ashley Bloomfield says close contacts of the 2 men are being or have already been contacted. The 3rd case is a Dunedin man in his 40s who has recently returned from Germany. The positive test result came through this morning. He started showing symptoms 5 days after his return. He's in self-isolation with 2 family members who also have symptoms. They're also being tested. One of them is a student at Logan Park High School.
The school is working with both education staff and public health officials. Obviously, we are all very interested to see the outcome of that test because the action that the school takes next will depend on the outcome. Our advice to the school is that if the test result is positive, the school is closed for the next 48 hours while close contacts are traced and put into self-isolation, and all casual contacts, staff and students, are given information about what to do if they become unwell. The school would be carefully cleaned before reopening. This is the approach that has been taken in other jurisdictions, in particular Australia.
Ashley Bloomfield says New Zealand can expect more sporadic cases of COVID-19, especially as the number of cases internationally continues to rise. But he stressed that all of the cases to date have been associated with overseas travel. Dr Bloomfield says both Healthline and the Government Call Centre were under extreme pressure yesterday, with 7 times the usual number of calls. He acknowledges that some people have had to wait a long time for help or their calls were dropped, and says there is now an online process for registering for self-isolation. Phone capacity is being increased and more nurses and trained staff are being brought in. If you're just joining us, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and we are with you through until 7 o'clock for an extended program tonight. After 6, we'll be joined by Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens, First Union's Tali Williams and business consultant Phil O'Reilly. Sky City CEO Graham Stevens says he can't rule off job layoffs, and Dunedin students celebrate St Patrick's Day in large groups, flouting requests to limit large gatherings. We would love your feedback, particularly if the package released today will benefit you as an employer or a worker. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now, though, to get to the headlines with Susanna.
Economist Shamabil Yaqub is welcoming the government's COVID-19 rescue package as an extraordinary, unprecedented boost to the economy. The $12.1 billion package includes wage subsidies, sick leave support and a benefits boost. He says it represents 4% of GDP, making it much bigger than what any other country has put forward. Meanwhile, health officials have revealed 3 more cases of the disease, taking the total to 11. All are from overseas. Business New Zealand says wage and leave subsidies announced in the government's COVID economic package should be relatively easy to apply for. $5.1 billion will be spent on wage subsidies for businesses able to show a 30% fall in revenue between January and June. There will be a subsidy of $585 a week for full-time workers and $350 million for part-time workers. Business New Zealand Chief Executive Kirk Hope says there won't be any red tape to wade through. The Prime Minister is defending the decision to include an across-the-board boost in benefits. National is criticising the boost to benefits, accusing the government of having its priorities wrong. But Jacinda Ardern says the boost in the winter energy payment is a practical step to keep the country's most vulnerable well this winter. She says it will get more money into the economy. The Finance Minister says New Zealand is better off than most other countries, which are shutting down because of large community outbreaks. Grant Robertson told Checkpoint the government is taking drastic measures, such as closing borders, to avoid COVID-19 getting into the community. He says with whole countries shutting down, it's impossible to avoid an economic downturn. A Dunedin school is waiting to find out if one of its pupils is infected with coronavirus. The Ministry of Health announced 3 new cases and 2 potential cases who are showing symptoms. One of those is a student at Logan Park High School. The student is currently in self-isolation, with a man in his 40s confirmed with the virus after returning from Germany. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is an extended program on Checkpoint this evening. We'll be with you until 7 o'clock. Right now, though, it is time for business with Nona Peltier, who joins me live in the studio. Nona, a lot going on today, but let's start with the warehouse. So they have posted a strong first half.
Yeah. So they had some discontinued businesses, so that in fact impacted the net profit. But the underlying profit, which is excluding some of those one-time items like a tax adjustment and so on, saw their net profit rise 16.7%. So that's to $46.2 million, which is pretty hefty. And they're expecting a good return for the full year. But a lot depends on how things transpire through the second half.
Yeah, and what kind of signals are they sending about that?
Lots of uncertainty. However, they did say that their supply chain through China has been was not affected necessarily by the coronavirus because they had anticipated the Chinese New Year, and
they had stockpiles of their own already.
They typically import from China, so they prepare in advance. And so as a result of that, when the Chinese New Year hit, they had already put their stuff on the water. So their shipments came in. And now their operations are running back up in China, and they're not expecting to have any material effect on their bottom line. But notwithstanding that, the virus itself and the effect it might have on movements in the wider public could, in fact, impact this company. However,
in terms of shoppers being able to turn up to the store.
But we heard from Briscoe Group yesterday that their March sales were good. People were in the stores, and that's what we heard from the warehouse as well. So definitely people are out there shopping. And so, but there's a question mark over how they do in the second half. And so anyways, in the end, their share price fell about 1.5%. Today.
So another business of interest, Auckland Airport. Obviously, the aviation industry is getting the spotlight beamed onto it. So updated the market again. What's going on?
This time they said they were going to cancel their dividend payout. That's not really a big surprise. That one of their shareholders is Auckland Council. It owns about a quarter of the company, and so they're not going to get a dividend. And not only that, they're going to also look at cutting costs. They're going to stop hiring, and they're looking at other ways that they can save some money because, we heard today that Air New Zealand is going to cut a number of their Trans-Tasman flights. What was
80%,
it, like 80%?
80% of Trans-Tasman flights.
Yes, these are astounding numbers. And so... And we're hearing that the Jetstar and others are also going to be looking at kind of doing some cutbacks. So yeah, I think that Auckland Airport is probably taking a prudent approach by cutting what they can and not hiring any more staff at this point.
So what else has been happening on the market? It was a bit of a rocky open, but things kind
Well, the Wall Street had the worst session since, the global financial crisis. The main indices were down about 12%. So that wasn't a very good lead for New Zealand to come on. And so we dropped about 5% in early trading. But when Australia opened, now just keeping in mind that yesterday they had a near 10% fall, which was the worst since 1987. And so when Australia came back, it came back quite strongly. And as a result of that, the New Zealand market picked up. And what we've been seeing is it follows the Australian market. And when it ended up just down only 0.4%, just 42 points. So it was little change from yesterday.
Any particular reason for the greater confidence in the Aussie markets today? Is it just that people are hunting for a bargain?
It could be, you know what? It's so hard. It's impossible to tell. I was looking at the global markets and, just you read these numbers and you think, how could this possibly be? But the global markets, for example, oil prices, the Saudi Arabian oil producers are pumping out even more oil and the prices fell, believe it or not. Okay, so this morning there was a rise of 2.5%. to $30.81 US a barrel. That's the price of oil today. But that sounds like an increase of 2.5%. But then it says, but these gains are unlikely to hold because oil production keeps going up. I mean,
and people aren't travelling. People aren't moving around.
No, and there's no demand for it. It's a topsy-turvy type of world, I would say. And this virus is making people sick, but it's also making them irrational too.
Well, lucky we've got you here to go over the numbers for us.
All right, so do you want the rest?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so I gave you the top 50 index down 0.4% to 9,435, which is where we were about the beginning of last year. ASX, no, I don't have those numbers, but I do have the dollar. Oh, there's a bright note. 60.5 US cents is where we are.
Okay, so we've bounced back a little bit.
Yeah, but here's a good one. We're at 98.8 Australian, but overnight we got to 99. What was my numbers? I think 7.
So pretty much 1 for 1, we'll say.
Well, actually, the all-time high was 99.78, and we got to 99.77 overnight. But okay.
What about the British?
Oh yeah, that one. 49.3, we're always at the same level there.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Baltier with all the numbers from the day. The forestry sector was the first to feel the effects of COVID-19 as ports in China prevented the offloading of logs and workers here faced the chop. But slowly, there looks to be some signs of recovery. President of the Forest Owners Association, Peter Ware, joins me now. Good evening, Peter. You had hundreds of workers stood down at various times there. How are things looking now?
We did. Well, we're seeing a light at the end of this tunnel. Forestry situation is very different to tourism, certainly not all doom and gloom. In the last week, we're seeing log offtake in ports in China back to near normal. And the plywood manufacturers in China want fresh logs. But that said, log boats are arriving from Aussie and New Zealand are arriving at about the same rate as the offtake. So the massive inventory in China is not declining and prices remain subdued.
Yeah.
Look, New Zealand loggers working for the big companies, they've been on about 80%, a 4-day week. Some of them might be going back to 5 days a week. Pulp markets are really healthy, no pun intended. Some New Zealand pulp is going to supply face mask manufacturers, and that market you can imagine is red hot.
Exactly.
The shutdown that's just happened in Europe has taken a huge amount of containerised insect-damaged spruce logs out of the China market. So supply, and that's what really caused our problems last quarter of last year. China got oversupplied. The coronavirus was just the last straw.
So, Peter, when you mention 80%, workers, some of them are back to 80% hours, is that
4-day weeks? Yep.
Yeah. So is that all of them, or have you still got some people sitting on the sidelines?
Because prices subdued, the forest sector in New Zealand's a game of two halves. The woodlot owners, the small investors that only ever get one chance at logging, shut the gate and stop logging. If you were a logger that worked for a wood buyer that bought from woodlots and farmers, you're still out of work, unfortunately. The big companies knocked their loggers down to a 4-day week. They're probably going back to 5. Prices are subdued. Nobody's making any decent money, but it's really important we keep those loggers going. So it's a game of two halves.
So the ones that have moved away, where have they gone? What are they doing?
Okay, you better to talk to the Forest Industry Contractors Association on that. Some in the Gisborne region and Bay of Plenty have probably gone to the horticulture sector, working in pack houses and things. There will still be some pain out there amongst some of the independent loggers that work on the farm woodlot sector. Truck drivers are probably down to something like a normal 40-hour week from 70. But that's not the end of the world. You can survive on 40 hours a week. Those that have gone to the horticulture sector, the work is absolutely there. They're probably taking a bit of a pay cut, but the work is there.
So this package announced today, Peter, with the wage subsidies, is that going to help your industry at all?
Look, I think it's really useful if the virus gets a foothold here. Harvesting's not that time sensitive, but the planting season's not far away. This is sending all the right signals that if a worker has been exposed and needs to self-isolate, or if a worker actually comes down with it, there's no incentive to go to work because of the backstop they're getting paid. So in terms of business as usual forestry in an environment that's got this virus floating around, it's really useful in that space.
Is there anything more you need?
What we need is our workers not to go to work if they're feeling sick. We don't want the whole crew taken down, particularly in planting season. So this was a really good start.
Hey, so speaking of workers not going to work if they're ill, I understand you're in shutdown at the moment. Is that right, Peter?
Look, I self-isolated because I tried to go to the Formula One in Melbourne on Friday. I came home Saturday, but I thought I'd do the right thing and stay away from work for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, good on you. Appreciate you talking to us this evening. That is Peter Ware from the Forest Owners Association, who is himself in isolation after he said they're trying to head offshore and getting back before the deadline, but doing the right thing there. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. A lot happening today with that government package. Just over $12 billion announced there, a support package including wage subsidies and support for people who have to self-isolate. What does it mean for you? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Events continue to grind to a halt due to coronavirus, with more tumbling today from agriculture to theatre. But others are trying to go ahead by sneaking under the threshold of what the government's determined is a large gathering. Questions remain about whether shopping malls, casinos and churches should be open if they have more than 500 people. Jordan Bond reports.
No luck of the Irish for this couple on St Paddy's Day.
Our 6-week holiday has been cut short to 6 days.
Their events are cancelled and there's no promise they can even get in anywhere else. What was a world trip is now just a return trip.
Our cruise that we were planning in the Caribbean is no longer happening. We've lost a lot of money on flights as well because we no longer want to travel to the destinations. We've had to buy new flights. We're going home on Friday, hopefully, so long as the borders remain open.
More large events succumbed to the inevitable today after the government's directive to cancel gatherings of over 500 people. The Southern Hemisphere's largest agriculture event, the National Field Days, set for the middle of June, has been postponed, while the Central District's Field Days is off entirely. Hit Broadway musical The Book of Mormon has cut its first New Zealand run in Auckland short, effective immediately. The A&P and Royal Easter Show in Auckland, drawing crowds of around 150,000 people, was also called off today. Board Chair David Scott says it's a shame, but there's no other option.
Disappointed, but you know, you do what you have to do, and I don't think there was ever any debate about what we would do under those circumstances, you know, and that's the one time that you know the public probably needs it as a bit of a pick-me-up for people, but hey, it's not a workable thing.
But what's in a number, 500, and what counts as a gathering? Shopping centres are still open, which would regularly have more than 500 people on site. Campbell Barber, the chair of the New Zealand Council of Retail Property, with shopping centres as members, says they fall outside of the government's directive. They're not ticketed and they can't track where people had been.
Modern shopping centres go well beyond just convenience. Retail, supermarkets, pharmacies, health services, we believe are part of everyday life and embedded in in local communities, and so we do believe they are an essential part of everyday life.
And one show, called Menopause the Musical, has posted on Facebook that it will continue to run but sell a maximum of 450 tickets to come in under what constitutes a large gathering. It's due to play in Taupō tonight and then other regional centres over the next week. It did not respond to a request for comment. Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says it's more about the principle than a specific figure.
People will understand what the purpose of the 500 number is. It's not a bright line. It's to ensure that people are doing the right thing. And I'm not sure that organisers would be taking the approach, well, if I organise 450, I don't need to worry about it. It's their responsibility, not just to protect the people attending the event, but actually to contribute to a wider response.
Destiny Church has vowed to continue, saying it has about 1,000 worshippers each Sunday. Sky City casinos are staying open too, but unplugging every second poker machine to increase the distance between people and limiting the number of players around a table. CEO Graham Stevens says their casino business has been down the last month and they can't rule out job losses or even a complete closure with the future so unknown.
We note that in other countries where total lockdowns have taken place, everything closes. So we have to contemplate that. We are not living in that world, and I don't think other New Zealand businesses are right now. But I think all of us have to plan for the possibility of a total lockdown.
Ashley Bloomfield says there will be further announcements on large gatherings in the next day or two. A host of concerts and sporting events are off too, and it now seems far more likely events anytime soon won't go ahead than will. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
In breaking news, 2 travellers from Southeast Asia are in custody after failing to comply with self-isolation requirements. Both are potentially facing possible deportation. So that is 2 travellers from Southeast Asia. They are in custody after failing to comply with the rules around self-isolation. Across the world, more borders are shutting and there are more restrictions for public gatherings as leaders announce even stricter measures to fight the COVID-19 coronavirus. G7 leaders met via video conference overnight to discuss their plans to contain the spread of the virus, which has now infected 174,000 people worldwide. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged against all non-essential social contact and non-essential travel and warned people to stay away from pubs. In Germany, stringent new measures have been announced that will close most shops and venues, and borders have been closed with several neighbours. The French President Emmanuel Macron is banning people from leaving their homes except for groceries, exercise or to seek medical help. President Macron says France is at war with the pandemic. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
A country home to the City of Lights switched off for now.
Dear citizens, I take full measure of the impact that these decisions will have on your lives.
French President Emmanuel Macron is the latest European leader to announce a countrywide lockdown in a special address to the nation, banning non-essential travel and gatherings.
Going for a walk in the park to catch up with friends or in the street is no longer allowed. You have to limit your contact, any contact you have outside of the home. And this is applicable everywhere across France. Anyone who does not abide by those guidelines will be punished.
France has more than 5,000 cases of the infection and more than 100 people have died. President Macron has closed the country's external borders and will mobilise the military to help the sick, declaring the country is at war with the virus. Many people predicted the president's movement ban, some queuing for hours outside supermarkets earlier in the day.
I'm here to get, what are they called? Provisions. Because you can never be too careful with what's happening and everything. We don't know what's happening in the coming months and everything. Better to be safe than sorry.
In Germany, most shops and entertainment venues are closed. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ordered Restaurants to enforce a minimum distance between tables and open in restricted hours.
Das beinhaltet und bringt mit sich auch
no vacation travels in and out of Germany should be taken. Restaurants should only open at 6 a.m. and close latest by 6 p.m.
All travel to the European Union will be banned, with only citizens, long-term residents and family members of EU nationals allowed in. The ban lasts 30 days for now. In Britain, people are being asked to stay away from pubs and clubs and stop unnecessary travel, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson has stopped short of forcing closures.
Without drastic action, cases could double every 5 or 6 days. So from tomorrow, we will no longer be supporting mass gatherings.
More than 1,500 people have tested positive for the virus in the UK, but the actual number of cases is estimated to be between 35 and 50,000.
And that's the ABC's Isabel Rowe reporting. A Pike River family member says he feels betrayed by a decision not to re-enter the main workings of the mine. The announcement was made today along with an extra $11 million to complete recovery of the main entry tunnel by July or August. That means the cost of finding the cause of the explosion and the bodies of the 29 men who died has doubled to $47 million. But as Conan Young reports, some think the job is being left half done.
Bernie Monk has battled for nearly a decade to get his son Michael back and see somebody held accountable for his death. For him, today's news that no assessment will be made on whether the main workings of the mine can be entered means his battle is a long way from finished.
How can they make this call when the whole idea was to go down the 800 metres that's never been investigated, make a call before we even get there?
The main workings of the mine are where most of the men's remains are thought to be, and where the ignition source of the explosion is most likely to be found. Bernie Monk says he was assured by police and the government that re-entering this part of the mine would be considered once the entry tunnel had been recovered. He now feels betrayed and is promising to reveal information showing how the police investigation has been bungled.
It'll show what happened, who was the cause of it, and all the events that went after the explosion that were at fault, and government departments that let the country down.
Bernie Monk is notably not part of the Family Reference Group, set up by the government to ensure it's consulting with families on its re-entry plans. Sonia Rockhouse, who lost her son Ben, is on the group. She's also disappointed there won't be an attempt to get beyond a large area of rockfall to the main workings.
But of course that's all we asked for. The government have delivered exactly what we've asked for. So as much as we would like to be able to go further on up, that is disappointing. I personally understand why that just won't happen.
Sonia Rockhouse defends the $47 million spent on re-entry.
What price do you put on getting some truth and justice when 29 men are killed? We've not had anything, so hopefully we're going to get some prosecutions out of this and get some sort of accountability for us.
Pike River Recovery Minister Andrew Little says there was always a possibility the costs would increase once they got inside the mine and had a better idea of the state it was in.
The big cost was the fact that a lot of work went in last year to understanding the environment in the mine, preparing for it, changing the approach to ventilation of the mine. That put a big delay on it, and we had to carry those overheads for a year more than we had expected.
Mr Little says he always knew that re-entering the main workings would be difficult, if not impossible.
We said, look, let's get down the end and see what things look like, but with the experience of the last 2 years, knowing the technical challenges even just to recover the drift, knowing the state that it's in, knowing the work that is required, it is very clear that the level of technical challenge as well as the health and safety challenge of going beyond the rockfall is just far too great.
The recovery team has already made it 400 metres inside the entry tunnel and hopes to be all the way down to the rockfall, a distance of 2.3 kilometres, by July or August. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Let's head to Chicago now, where staff at the Shed Aquarium have taken tourism to a new extreme. Whilst the facility is closed amid the coronavirus outbreak, staff got creative. Now, if you were watching, they released this social media video showing Wellington, the penguin, exploring his own aquarium for the first time. The little rock hopper and his mates, Annie and Edward, were allowed to waddle around under the guidance of keepers and have a look at the Amazon Rising exhibit to see how the other half, namely fish, live. Staff say they let the penguins have a mooch to encourage animal enrichment. The aquarium is not expected to open until next month, and they do look incredibly curious, the way their heads spin around like that, wobbling around. Too cute. You should check out the video. Now, to some of your feedback before the news at 6. A lot of you asking questions about this wage support package. I'm a casual contract worker in the entertainment industry. Most of my work for the foreseeable future has been cancelled. I'm struggling to find information. What is my best course of action? Emily and Alan say, help please, we're a husband and wife family business, self-employed, no employees. Soon we'll not be able to pay our rent. Will this package help us? Well, here's the advice. Go onto the Work and Income website, www.workandincome.gov.nz, and it has the list there. But essentially, if you're an employer, contractor, sole trader or self-employed person, you may qualify for assistance if you can show that there's a 30% reduction in your turnover in one of the months specified. So there are options there. The best thing is to go onto the website. Joe says, I'm pleased to hear that independent contractors are covered by the income support package. I work in an industry that's largely staffed by contractors. Also, Grant Robertson appears to have spread the payments and support broadly and thickly enough. Not mentioned widely is the tax payment commitment changes that have been made, a big help to smaller businesses, says Joe. Also, obviously, you're tuned in listening to us here on Checkpoint. We're going to stay on air for an extended program through until 7 o'clock tonight, after the government this afternoon unveiled that $12.1 billion economic package to help those affected by COVID-19. So stay with us.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. 2 travellers from Southeast Asia are in custody after failing to comply with self-isolation. Immigration New Zealand says the pair arrived yesterday after the deadline, but didn't follow the mandatory isolation after entering the country. It says they are liable for deportation, but must remain in New Zealand for the remainder of the isolation period. They're currently being held in quarantine, but if they fail to leave afterwards, they will be arrested and detained. And a woman who arrived in Christchurch yesterday will be deported after refusing to self-isolate. Spot checks on isolated people began today. The Finance Minister can't say how many jobs the massive coronavirus relief package will save, but he hopes it will be plenty. $12.1 billion will be spent on wage subsidies, sick leave support and a boost to benefits in what's being called the largest peacetime economic plan in the country's modern history. The tourism industry has been warning it will lose tens of thousands of jobs because of COVID-19. Grant Robertson has told Checkpoint it's impossible to know how many people will now be able to stay in work.
What particularly the wage subsidy package is about is giving employers time to readjust to the new normal that we're in, to make sure that they can keep staff in place. We do know that New Zealanders will lose their jobs as a result of this coronavirus situation. What we have tried to do today is cushion the blow of that.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. Wage subsidies will be available for hard-hit businesses under the government's COVID-19 economic package announced this afternoon. Employers will be paid $585 per week for full-time staff and $350 for part-time staff. Paul Fuima-Ono runs Toru Tours, an Auckland tour company. He says workers with mortgages will still struggle.
With the house prices at $1 million in Auckland, it's not going to be anywhere near enough. If you've got a mortgage free, you're going to be able to survive just.
Paul Fuima-Ono from the Auckland company Toru Tours. A Dunedin school is waiting to find out if one of its pupils is infected with coronavirus. The Ministry of Health has announced 3 new cases and 2 potential cases who are showing symptoms. One of those is a student at Logan Park High School. A student is in self-isolation with a man in his 40s, a family member, who was confirmed with the virus after returning from Germany. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the test results determine the next steps for the school.
Our advice to the school is that if the test result is positive, the school is closed for the next 48 hours while close contacts are traced and put into self-isolation, and all casual contacts, staff and students, are given information about what to do if they become unwell.
Ashley Bloomfield says if the pupil is a confirmed case, the school will be carefully cleaned before reopening. A South Auckland-based Māori warden says some people feel safer with armed police response teams on the roads, despite controversy over the trial. Māori justice advocates have submitted an urgent Waitangi Tribunal claim over the armed response teams, or ARTs. Mariana Johnson reports.
Claimant Julia Whaipote says the Crown breached the treaty by failing to inform Māori that ARTs would be patrolling the streets of counties Manukau, Waikato and Canterbury. She says Māori are already at high risk of being shot by police, and regular armed police patrols increase this risk. But Otahuhu Māori Wardens Chair Thomas Henry says the elderly in South Auckland are scared and the ARTs make them feel safer. Ko Mariana Johnson, TNA.
It's coming up to 6:04. The Wellington Phoenix will leave for Sydney tomorrow after the club reached an agreement with Australian health officials to be able to train within the 2-week self-isolation window and then recommence their A-League football campaign. The Phoenix's last 2 home matches have been cancelled, and Football Federation Australia is still to decide whether these matches will be played. The New Zealand Rugby Players Association Chief Executive Rob Nichol will not rule out cuts to players' wages as rugby takes a financial hit in the coronavirus pandemic. Nichol says the players will have to be prepared to help the sport pick up the pieces.
We know it's going to have a commercial impact, and we know that as one of those stakeholders we're going to have to step up and be around the table and working out how we deal with it moving forward.
Rob Nichol. Warriors fans might see some new names in their team after the second round of the NRL. The Warriors CEO Cameron George says the club is looking to loan players from other rugby league clubs to help get their squad up to 30 players for the remainder of the season while they're based in Australia.
Been talking to a couple of clubs about some players that might be available under the circumstances, how that would look, for how long. There's a number of questions that need to be answered by the NRL with that, but it's a real possibility given the restrictions of travel. We can't get people in there, so there's a real option for us to look at. It's just working out who and where from.
Cameron George, that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our 4 widows of Shuhada reflect on time and whether it's begun to heal the wounds inflicted on them by the Christchurch gunman. There's a woe-mad edition of Worlds of Music, and the engineer Susan Krumdiek on transitioning away from fossil fuels and how the world hasn't been doing that until COVID-19. The pandemic, she says, might just save our grandchildren from ourselves. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland all the way to Kapiti Coast, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Becoming fine tonight. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, cloudy with a few showers. Showers clearing from the south tomorrow and fine spells increasing. Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine. A few showers about the Kaikoura coast, clearing early tomorrow morning. Bulla to Fiordland fine today, becoming cloudy tomorrow morning and a few showers developing. Canterbury mostly cloudy with occasional showers clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland becoming fine. Chatham Islands cloudy, a chance of a shower. RNZ National. It's 6:30.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome back. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The government is unleashing a $12.1 billion torrent of spending in what it calls the largest peacetime economic plan in New Zealand's modern history. The rescue package, designed to cushion the economic blow of COVID-19, includes wage subsidies, sick leave support and a boost to benefits. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
If there was any question New Zealand's staring down the barrel of a recession, the government today put that to bed.
We are going to see many New Zealanders lose their jobs and some businesses will fail.
A stark difference from the picture painted just weeks ago when the Finance Minister Grant Robertson was predicting a short shock for for just a handful of months. None of that optimism now.
A recession in New Zealand is now almost certain, with the advice that we are receiving that the shock will be larger than that seen during the global financial crisis.
A monumental blow to the economy, demanding a monumental response. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, had signalled a significant package. She wasn't underselling.
In unprecedented times, you make unprecedented decisions.
The package is enormous in scale, $12.1 billion, with the lion's share going to business. It includes a $5.1 billion wage subsidy scheme to keep Kiwis in work. Struggling workplaces will receive $585 a week per full-time employee for 12 weeks, up to a maximum of $150,000 per business. The government will pay the same amount to people who get sick or need to quarantine themselves for up to 8 weeks.
Given the size and speed of the economic shock that we are facing, we recognise the immediate need to support businesses and workers to cushion the economic impact on households and firms.
The main benefits will also jump by $25 a week permanently, and the winter energy payment, available to beneficiaries and superannuitants, will be doubled this year. A $500 million fund has also been dedicated to strengthening health services, including a near doubling of the number of public health units. As a percentage of GDP, the entire package almost doubles what was rolled out in Australia last week.
I have not seen a nation in the world who has yet put up a package of this quantum.
And our Prime Minister says she's gone harder, faster. I don't see it, Jacinda Ardern. I just don't see it.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges has labelled the package muddled and confused. He says it puts money in the pockets of beneficiaries quicker than it does businesses.
And I don't see us getting out of this sooner and stronger. I don't see the faster, harder, whatever it was the Prime Minister says. I see the slower, less assured, taking the opportunity to prioritise beneficiaries over businesses and workers in this country and what it is that they need.
Treasury officials say the plan will blunt the blow of the coming recession, with the economy taking a $3 billion haircut instead of a $9 billion one. Still, that's a hefty hit, and Mr Robertson acknowledges not every business will be saved.
There are tough days ahead, but we will get through this together.
For the government, that's phase 1 of its economic response. Phase 2 will come in May's budget. But we're in uncharted territory between now and then. The global landscape could yet dramatically change. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te aihahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
And do stay with us, because after 6:30 tonight we'll be joined by Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens, First Union's Tali Williams and business consultant Phil O'Reilly. All bets are off as Sky City says it can't rule out job losses in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. In an effort to protect its more than 5,000 staff, the company has turned off 40% of its pokies on its main casino gaming floor, reduced the number of people allowed at gaming tables, and instructed staff to self-isolate if need be. Sky City's CEO Graham Stevens says while the business is well geared to weather the decline in customers, it's planning for what a total shutdown of operations might mean should their luck come to that.
We've made a decision to turn off every second electronic gaming machine, so there's a space between players. We're limiting the number of players at any one table to no more than 5, and that'll be fine during the week. Friday, Saturday, when we peak, we're going to have to manage it, so we steer customers to different parts of the building, and ultimately, if we get too busy, we'll just have to turn people away.
So in terms of those gaming machines, the pokies, you're turning off every second machine in order to keep space between the players, are you? Is that the reasoning?
Yes. So just so you guaranteed you can sit at a machine and you've got no one left or right of you and enough space between you and any potential next player.
So how many machines have you had to switch off then as a consequence of that spacing?
It'll be about 40% of our machines, because the banks aren't all odd-numbered. So it works out at about 40%. We've also worked with the Ministry of Health to try and get endorsement as to whether these sort of measures are satisfactory, and they're saying that we're doing the right thing here. So
40% of your machines, how significant of that in terms of the pokies machines? 40%. How significant is that in terms of the revenue that they generate and the people they bring in?
It'll affect us Friday nights and Saturday nights. The rest of the week, we don't run at full capacity anyway. It's those 2 nights of the week where we would typically be at capacity. The truth is we've been a little down on visitation anyway. So the capacity today is different to capacity a month or two ago. So in all of it, we think we can do it, mitigate the safety of our customers without overly prejudicing the business.
So how much down are you on visitors then?
I can't talk to that today. We are planning a market update tomorrow. We've got a board meeting tonight. It's obviously been a moving feast. So whereas we thought we were ready to go out towards the end of last week, new regulations and restrictions over the weekend means we've had another look at it. I think tomorrow we'll be able to talk more freely with a market update. We're not facing the same immediate crisis that other businesses are facing in the industry. We're still a largely domestic business, and I think absent community to community sort of case of coronavirus in New Zealand, people are still happy to go out. So yes, we've been impacted, but not to the same extent as businesses that are more directly focused on international travel.
So what percentage of your patronage would be from overseas visitors and use of the hotel?
The overseas component of our business is quite focused on the hotel side of the business. The Sky Tower is obviously, that's something that all international tourists want to go up and down. There's a component of our gaming business, our international business, which is around about 10% of the business that's entirely reliant on international visitors, and it's been impacted, obviously.
And are those your higher end customers? Those that 10%, which you say are from offshore, are they the bigger rollers?
Yes, that's them. 10% by value, not by volume, and. They are, and they have been unable to travel here with travel restrictions in place in Australia and New Zealand. So that's a part of the business that's obviously been impacted. But for the bulk of it, it's domestic. It's people that drive to us, and for that reason, it's not been the same immediate impact. There's obviously been some negative impact, and we're looking at this lasting and probably getting worse actually over the next few months. So. Trying to factor all of that into guidance, which we'll give to the market, has been a challenge. But we'll be able to share a bit more stats tomorrow.
Do you anticipate job losses?
Well, clearly we hope not, and we are not actively targeting any job losses right now. Tightening belts, yes, and getting people to work maybe a little less, taking more leave during this period. Over the next 12 to 14 months, we're a big net employer. We'll be opening Adelaide. We're hoping to get the hotel in Auckland open in the first half of 2021. So it's counterintuitive to be losing jobs now only to employ again in the not too distant future.
At the moment, Graham, are you asking people to take leave, though?
We haven't asked anyone yet, but it'll be probably those sort of initiatives ahead of job losses. We're trying to match our employee hours and days to our levels of business, and having people stay in jobs, maybe working less, maybe getting a little less in the interim, knowing that in the medium term, hopefully things are back to normal. So trying to keep people on the payroll that match hours work to volumes in the business. That's current thinking, but it's got quite a bit of work to go into that to achieve that.
And can you rule out job losses at this point?
I don't think anyone can, but I can say, absent a closure, so let's maybe dwell on that. Whilst we're trading, I think we can shoulder, shorter-term losses, knowing we're going to be employing longer term. One of the situations we watch globally is lockdowns and total closures. If we were forced to close, that's obviously a different world. We employ over 5,000 people. And so closure is something we want to avoid at all costs, as does the rest of the country. And in that vein, we sort of characterise ourselves as more of a shopping mall in nature. Lots of
So, Graham,
small
just to be...
outlets within a large precinct.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you see a scenario where you may have to close the casino? Is that something you're planning for?
We note that in other countries where total lockdowns have taken place, everything closes. So we have to contemplate that. We are not living in that world, and I don't think other New Zealand businesses are right now. But I think all of us have to plan for the possibility of a total lockdown. So yes, we're developing plans, but are obviously very hopeful that that day doesn't arrive. And hopefully the measures taken by government to flatten the curve mean that the country can cope without having to take that sort of drastic action.
And that's Graham Stevens, who's Sky City CEO. Now to Dunedin, where hundreds of green-costumed University of Otago students are celebrating St Patrick's Day, despite requests to limit large parties. It comes after the university urged students not to gather in big groups to prevent the spread of coronavirus and to be socially responsible. Tess Brunton spoke to students about why they were choosing to celebrate, not self-isolate.
The celebrations started early, with some students opening their first drink by 6:30 in the morning. By mid-morning, students were gathered in a park near the North Dunedin Cemetery, speakers blaring and drinks in hand.
I think that we are the reason that it will spread, but we may not be the reason that it gets really bad.
So what do you mean that you'll be the reason that it will spread?
Because we don't get really bad symptoms, but we can pass it on to older people. And that's where it goes bad.
Do you plan to change your behaviour?
No. I don't know. Probably should.
While many know how to help limit the spread of coronavirus, they say it won't stop them from partying.
Wash your hands, guys. Stay at home. Don't do what we're doing. Wash your hands. Look after your grandma and granddad.
Visiting his Australian family is off the cards for one student.
I have to do a 14-day isolation at home in Australia and 14-day isolation in New Zealand. And I'll only be going home for 2 weeks, so I can't go home.
Students danced on a car roof while others gathered in groups on the grass. Police officers arrived just after 11 a.m, monitoring and speaking with partygoers, but making no attempts to shut it down. Many questioned why events were being cancelled, but not large uni lectures.
Why are they keeping schools and universities
Exactly,
open?
makes
Which
no
I don't
sense.
think makes sense.
Makes
Because we
no
go into
sense.
health science and we would go into a lecture and there'd be 1,000 people in there, but they would close down Culture Shock on Thursday night. In halls as well. More viruses would be spread from touching doors, touching everything.
One reveller is worried what might happen if the uni shuts its doors.
If they send us all home, then we go to Auckland, Christchurch, Hawke's Bay, blah, 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 and then we give it to our parents who are the ones at risk.
And our
Who are the ones at risk? And I don't want to do that to my lovely parents and my lovely grandparents.
The university's head of student health, Margaret Purley, says it's disappointing to see the size of the North Dunedin party.
We were trying to stress yesterday that we don't want to add more workload to the health resources because they're going to be very stretched. So it's thinking carefully ahead of events planned in the future and the impact they may have on others, not the student themselves. We really need to minimise spread, and mass gatherings are not a way to minimise spread.
Text messages, emails, posters and social media posts are among the ways the university is trying to keep students informed. Ms Purley says the university is planning to reduce lecture numbers to a maximum of 499 this week. The clinical group leader for the GPs at Student Health, Brett Doherty, says people should follow the Ministry of Health guidelines.
This is protection not just for themselves, but for the people they care about, the people in their community who are most vulnerable, those with pre-existing medical conditions, those over 60, that we need to really have a sense of social responsibility, that this is a way to keep everybody well.
Back at the party, a nursing student had a simple message about coronavirus.
I just think if we wash our hands, chill out, not be so bacterial with each other, just all chill, everything will work out.
While the police say students have been pretty well behaved so far, the university wants to see them being more socially responsible as the threat of coronavirus looms closer to home. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
It is 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and don't forget we are on air till 7 this evening with a special panel analysing the business package released by the government today. The jury in the trial of a police officer accused of raping his colleague has heard closing addresses from both sides in the case. The man, whose identity remains secret on appeal, is on trial in the Auckland District Court after pleading not guilty to indecent assault and sexual violation. The 29-year-old is accused of groping a female colleague during a boozy night with colleagues and later raping her as she slept in a Kerikeri motel. Our court reporter Annika Smith was in court today and she filed this story.
It's the Crown's case the accused officer raped his colleague and then lied to his boss, cleaning himself of DNA and destroying evidence to cover up the crime. In her closing remarks this morning, Crown prosecutor Fiona Kalaini told the jury he'd simply helped himself to the sleeping woman that night.
Since then, he has covered up what he has done because there's really only one word to describe what he did that night, and that's rape. He raped her.
The defendant and complainant were both staying at the motel that night with a group of colleagues working in Northland during Waitangi commemorations last year. The woman has told the jury she woke up in pain as the man raped her that night, while the defence has argued the woman isn't a rape victim, but rather a willing participant in a pre-arranged hookup who regretted cheating on her partner. Today, Ms. Kalani told the jury the case was not one of cheating or flirting, but entitlement and sexual assault.
He indecently assaulted earlier in the night. He pushed her, he shoved his hands into her trousers, into her shorts, and he didn't take no for an answer. And when she was asleep, when he knew the coast was clear, with the sense of entitlement he quite clearly has, he crept into her room and he raped her.
She said a recording the complainant made moments after the alleged rape was devastating to the man's case. In the clip, you can hear the woman saying, "I denied you earlier and I've woken up to you having sex with me," and the man replying, "What do you want me to do?"
Wouldn't your first reaction to the suggestion that you've just raped somebody be to say, "What are you talking about? This is crazy. This was consensual. You invited me in here. You told me to come over." And yet, she's told us he never said anything of the sort. He was manipulating her, saying, "Don't make me do this."
The court has heard the man deleted Snapchat that night, making 2 unread messages he sent the woman void. Ms. Kalani said it was the Crown's case the man was destroying incriminating evidence and had also cleaned himself, evidenced by a wet flannel found in his bathroom and an unusual absence of any DNA found on his genitals. Addressing the jury this afternoon, the man's lawyer, Paul Borich QC, told the jury the Crown had appealed to emotions they now had to discard as judges of the facts in a criminal trial. He said the woman's story was a lie.
What the defence says to you is this "I was asleep" is a fiction. It's created, like a lot of things in this case, by the complainant, not to face up to what actually occurred that night.
He said his client may be guilty of cheating, but he was not a criminal.
You might think a lot of people have let themselves down as a result of this incident. Clearly has let himself and his loved ones down. I suggest has also done similar. I make it clear to you, and I made it clear to her whilst she was in the witness box, that she did, but she just can't face up to that.
Mr. Borich asked the jury to consider if his client had had a fair go, alleging some police officers hadn't been honest about what happened that night. Judge Evangelos Thomas will sum up the case tomorrow morning before the jury retires to deliberate. At the Auckland District Court, this is Annika Smith.
A man who stabbed one of the country's most notorious murderers more than 40 times has been sentenced to preventative detention. Siuaki Lisiati, himself a convicted murderer, attacked double killer Graham Burton while the men were doing time in the maximum security prison at Auckland's Piremoremo in May 2018. Matthew Tunison reports.
Lisiati, who'd previously pleaded guilty to wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, was handcuffed and flanked by 4 security guards when he appeared for sentencing in the High Court at Auckland this morning. Justice Venning described the attack in which another prisoner hit Burton before Lisiati and a third man moved in.
By this stage, Mr. Burton was lying on the ground. You removed 2 shanks you had on you and repeatedly stabbed Mr. Burton to the head and face and upper torso. You also kicked Mr. Burton numerous times. During the assault, you stabbed Mr. Burton over 40 times.
Burton, who has a prosthetic leg after a limb was amputated when he was shot by police in 2007, survived but suffered permanent damage to his right eye. Lissiati's lawyer Ron Mansfield submitted that Lissiati had been acting in self-defence because Burton had threatened him and was a violent man. He asked the judge to give some weight to the reality of life inside prison and to consider that Lissiati had become institutionalised due to spending much of his life inside since age 17.
Do we want to acknowledge the steps he is taking or referred to in order to seek rehabilitation and provide him with that opportunity? Because we're at risk, in my submission, of extinguishing any enthusiasm he might have to pursue rehabilitation if we're not careful in the kind of sentence imposed.
Justice Venning rejected these claims and imposed the indeterminate prison sentence.
I consider you to be a high risk of reoffending in a violent way. You have no real insight into your offending. You lack empathy for victims and the people you harm. Your offending and the risk you pose the community, both within prison and outside prison, is such that a sentence of preventive detention is required.
After the sentence was read out, Lissiati gestured at two men sitting in the public gallery and banged his handcuffs on the glass screen separating them, then swore at Justice Venning.
You are sentenced to preventive detention. You are to serve a minimum term of 5 years, 2 months imprisonment. Stand down.
You judge.
The court was told that Lissiati is a senior member of the Crips gang. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after ordering the killing of a prisoner from a rival gang in 2009. Burton remains in Paremaremo, where he's also serving a preventive detention sentence. He murdered Paul Anderson in a drug-fueled attack outside a Wellington nightclub in 1992. And in 2007, while he was out on parole, he killed Carl Kuchenbecker in the hills of Wainuiomata. In 2008, he tried to kill former Headhunters gang member Dwayne Marsh in Paremaremo, stabbing him 27 times. In Auckland 4 Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunison Tēnei.
Before we go to the headlines, just some of your feedback here on people being encouraged to sort of travel the country. This person says, some of you will remember the don't leave town until you've seen the country motto. There are many Kiwis who bugger off to the GC, Phuket or the States without even travelling south of the Bombays of North or of Rangiora. So I would say if you have cancelled an overseas holiday, take one somewhere in New Zealand. That is from Mike from Te Kingi. Now, Mike says, I was brought up in a railway family and we went everywhere in New Zealand. I can get a rental in any city, he says, and I know where to go. Mike, text us, please. What is the best place to take a holiday in New Zealand if we can't leave the country? 2101. And do stick with us. We're on for an extra half hour with our expert panel. But let's head now to the headlines with Paul.
Thanks, Lisa. 2 travellers from Southeast Asia are in custody after failing to comply with self-isolation rules to stop the spread of COVID-19. The Finance Minister says the government's coronavirus relief package announced this afternoon will help employers keep people in jobs. Wage subsidies of $585 a week for full-time staff and $350 for part-timers will be available for hard-hit businesses. A Dunedin school is waiting to find out if one of its pupils is infected with coronavirus. And a South Auckland-based Māori warden says some people feel safer with armed police response teams on the roads, despite controversy over the trial. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for joining us. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Of course, this is a special Checkpoint program. We're on air for an extra half hour this evening. And joining me to analyse the government's business rescue package is Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens, First Union's Tali Williams, and business consultant Phil O'Reilly is joining us from our Wellington studio. Good evening to you all. Thanks for joining me. I want to start with just a quick whip around to you all. What do you make of this package? How would you rate it out of 10? Let's start with you, Dominic.
I'd rate it 8 out of 10, not too bad. It was fairly aggressive. It's a big chunk of money hitting the economy at the right time. The idea is to tide people over. We don't want to spray money indiscriminately. I don't think that would do anything. But we need to tide people over what will inevitably be a period of a really slack economy. Most of what they said offered will do that. Bits of it looked as though they were just tacking on things they wanted to do do anyway, were actually costed over 4 years and weren't as targeted as I would have liked. But the wage subsidy in particular, I think, was a good first step.
So 8 out of 10 for you, Tali. What did you make of it?
I think I'd give it an 8 out of 10 as well. I think it's a good start. I think it's a hopeful package. What workers will see in it is hope, and particularly in those situations where they're nervous about redundancies coming their way, nervous about hours cuts. There'll be people who will be happy to see that if they do need to self-isolate, they will be covered in terms of wages. That will mean a lot to people who haven't had that certainty up until now. And also for those people who are reliant on benefits, or maybe become soon reliant on benefits, that increases will mean a lot as well.
Okay, so we've got 2 8 out of 10s. Phil, what do you give it and why?
I'll go the Dancing with the Stars and give them 8 as well, Lisa. I think it was a sensible package, but it's only a start. And the Minister acknowledged that. So it's a start that focuses mainly on small business and mainly on keeping people sticky to businesses. In other words, employees, keeping them employed. It ignores the fact so far that there's a lot of reasons why businesses fall over. They've got nothing to do with labour costs, lease costs, capital costs, stock costs and all the rest. It also ignores, for now, small, big and medium businesses, and some of them are going to fall over, I dare say. Now, importantly, the Minister says he's going to come and sort that out too. He makes the point this is the first of a series of announcements. So this 12.1 billion, I think, is our start. I think it's going to get a lot bigger than this, and it's going to go on a lot longer than 12 weeks.
Tali, what is the reality for workers out there right now? What are your people telling you?
So we do have a lot of anxiety for people associated with, are they going to lose their jobs? Are there going to be hours cuts as a result of the
What
coronavirus?
industries are you talking about here?
In particular, forestry, some retail, like smaller retail stores, particularly industries which rely on tourism. That's who we're seeing impacted the most right now. But importantly, and this doesn't really become part of the discussion as much as it should, there's a lot of workers out there who are really struggling to take sick leave that they need when they're sick or when they're self-isolating because their employers aren't clear with them on what their rights and entitlements are. And I think that's the missing piece, and that's what concerns our members the most right now, particularly in retail.
Okay, so today they announced, about 125 million going into this pot, which people will be able to draw on for the self-isolation. Do you think that will allay fears?
Yes, it'll mean a great deal for people. What we would have liked to have seen is perhaps an extension to the entitlements around paid sick leave, because that's the other element too. It's not just about have people got COVID-19, confirmed, but also, if people are, people
have
can't.
A cold or flu and
that's
have to stay
exactly
off.
right, and they need to be able to stay away from work. But if they don't have any paid sick leave, they're incentivised to come to work sick. That's a problem.
Get you. Dominic, what can we expect this to achieve? Because the Finance Minister was very clear. He kept using terms like this will cushion the blow. He's not saying it's going to make it all go away and there will still be job losses. So realistically, what can our expectations be about what this will achieve?
Well, let's just be absolutely clear. This economy is going into a sharp recession right now, and there's nothing the government or Reserve Bank can or indeed should do to prevent that. Actually, spraying money everywhere and simply boosting demand could be counterproductive. What we actually want is to suppress certain forms of economic activity at the moment while we deal with the virus. What the government needs to do, what it is aiming to achieve, as I said earlier, is tiding businesses over. We want to suppress certain forms of economic activity, but
like going out socialising?
Like travel, international travel. We have already suppressed that dramatically, and that on its own, we're looking at what the economy is going to do in the second quarter of this year. We think it could drop somewhere between 2 and 3% in a single quarter. To give you an idea, in 2008-9, the global financial crisis, the economy shrank by 2.7% over 18 months.
So you're saying that we could get the impact of the global financial crisis in a single quarter?
We will get the same contraction in GDP, but it will look quite different. It's much more focused on hospitality, tourism, retail, on particular industries. It's really severe, very sharp, and again, I don't think there's anything that can be done about it. What we don't want is for perfectly good businesses to fold in the meantime, so we need a package to keep them afloat. We don't want to, as Phil says, separate labour from work. You could end up with people sort of becoming separated from the labour force, so you want to keep people in work, and we don't want families to be unable to meet their basic needs as they go through this period. So government needs to operate, it's not trying to keep the economy operating at its previous level. The idea is to see people through this so that they come out the other side.
It's the safety net.
It's the safety net.
So, Phil, you mentioned there that, this is going to go on for much longer than maybe some people are anticipating or saying out loud. What is the biggest challenge for business? Is it that uncertainty and planning into that uncertain future?
Yeah, for now it is. So if you're a business, you just don't know what's going on. I've been working in my own business today. It's quite hard to plan ahead. You're just not quite sure where the blows are going to come from. And a little unlike Dominic, I accept the fact that the early doors stuff that we've already seen and will seize in places like tourism, retail, exports to China and so on. But the nature of the New Zealand economy is this will bounce right through the economy. So you'll get all sorts of unexpected business difficulties and failures and so on that might be well beyond what we think. And that's why the government's announcements today, being quite widespread, didn't say it was only in particular sectors or only in particular regions. It said businesses throughout, I thought was exactly the right way to go about it. Things hopefully will get a little clearer, but gee, they're not at the moment. I mean, you've got countries closing their borders, you've got all sorts of, quite unusual behaviour going on around the world. So the good thing about this package is it gives businesses a bit of hope in the meantime, but it'll need to be followed up, I think, with some announcements around what's going to happen in medium and larger businesses and those other things that might cause small businesses to collapse. If those things are put in place in the next few weeks, then I think we are well set for going forward.
The Finance Minister said on the show at the beginning of the program, he acknowledged that there could be another package before the budget, and he also mentioned that the 150,000 cap for the wage salaries does not help out some of those bigger businesses. What do they need, Phil?
Well, they'll often need things that are well and truly above and beyond just labour stickiness, if you like, but they'll need that too. They may need things like some capital restructuring. They may need injections of capital. They may need things like forgiveness of tax debt. The whole bunch of quite complex issues. That's
not
why
deferring of tax debt, but forgiving it.
Yeah, it could be all of those things. And a lot of those businesses will have quite bespoke needs. One might be quite different to the other depending on the particular exposures that they have. So, for example, Air New Zealand, will need some help, I suspect, at some stage. I wouldn't be surprised. That will be very different to, say, a manufacturing firm or a log exporting firm. They'll need different things. Hence the minister's, I think, sensible, concern about saying one size fits all. I think that'll need to be much more sort of set of bespoke packages, and that's why he's waiting. But he can't wait for too long because they'll start to get stressed, as you're seeing with some of the bigger businesses now.
I think it's worth adding at this point, though, there are limits to what can and should be done.
I agree.
So,
should they bail out in New Zealand, for example?
So the government wants to avoid bailing out firms that were going under anyway, for example. I think the principles here is that any help should be timely to get in and actually be useful, but it should be targeted, thus actually meeting needs that are out there in the economy and not bailing out failing firms, for example, and it should be temporary. And I am concerned that it's sort of just becoming a let's just do whatever we can, throw everything at it. Even some of the measures today were not particularly targeted.
Name a couple that you think were sort of borderline.
I think that the reinstating...
The winter payment? How about that one?
The $25 additional benefit and the...
do you disagree with that one?
The reinstating of depreciation for... They were probably both things the government was planning to do anyway. They're both permanent, so it's really nothing to do with COVID-19. It feels like they were just thrown into this along with the rest to pad the numbers a bit. Actually, things that are going to hit the economy in the next 3 or 4 months and actually help in the immediate term, that was about $7.5 billion. There's not really a $12 billion package.
Tali, what do you think of the $25 across-the-board increase for beneficiaries? Obviously, April 1st, they were going to get a bump with $10 extra a week, so that brings up the extra payment to about $35 a week.
So what we have to bear in mind is a lot of these future beneficiaries will be people who right now are in employment and then are made redundant. And these families need to be able to survive on the incomes that are paid by the government through the benefit system. The $25 extra is critical. I think it's just a little bit, it's one step in the right direction. There actually needs to be more. There will need to be more because we need livable incomes for these families who will soon find themselves potentially out of work.
Phil, on that issue, you raised the winter payment. That is so that you can pay for your power bill, etc. You don't think it should have been doubled?
Oh, look, that was poor policy all along, spraying money around at people who didn't necessarily need it. And
are you talking about pensioners there, Phil?
Yeah, but also wealthy pensioners too, by the way. So all sorts of people, including the very wealthy and the poorest. If you're going to see a payment like that, I'd much rather see it targeted at the poorest and the less well off and those who really need it. So it was poor policy all along. Adding to it doesn't make it any less poor policy. But let me also agree loudly with what the government's done on welfare beneficiaries. You'll know my view on that, Lisa. That I've long thought that welfare beneficiaries needed a kick up, and what the government's done here is brought forward an already planned budget announcement, and I think it was the right thing to do in that context of giving the unemployed and those who might soon be unemployed a bit of confidence about the government looking after them as well. So I think the politics of that were right, although I agree with Dominic, it's got nothing much to do with COVID-19. But let me disagree with
Do you think
what
it's
Dominic
optics, Phil? Do you think it's optics? Because they were going to be giving a big chunk of change to businesses. They had to be seen to be doing something for those people who are unemployed, or as Tali says, may soon be unemployed.
Sure, I agree. And the sort of welfare piece, I think, is much less problematic than the winter heating co-payment, which was always poor public policy.
The winter heating payment is at least temporary, so it's
to help people stay healthy, isn't it?
That's right.
Arguably.
So, and to be clear, I mean the $25 extra for beneficiaries, whether that's good policy in the long run it may well be. That's fantastic, but it's not much to do with COVID-19. That's the point.
So, do you think that the government underestimated the economic impact of this thing? Because just a few weeks ago, we had the finance minister saying he was preparing for a sharp shock that would last 6 months, although there were 2 other scenarios in the works. Did he underestimate it? Did we all underestimate it economically?
He did, and we all did. And let's face it, it broke in China. We thought it was to do with China. We saw the number of new infected people actually peaking in China and coming back. We all underestimated the economic impact, and it really has snowballed recently, and we're all sort of catching up. I think the penny dropped when we effectively closed the borders, and we understood that is going to have an extremely severe...
that was the major economic realisation there?
It's been snowballing week by week. Everybody's been updating their forecast. We issued our last set of forecasts the week before last. They're already out of date. We're issuing new ones tomorrow. They're much more negative than the ones a week and a half old.
Give me a flavour of this. Are you huddled in a back room constantly watching numbers, or what? How quickly is this evolving for you?
What's happening is we're receiving new news on the virus. We're being updated by the World Health Organization and the like on how the virus is going to play out. And as we receive that news, we're figuring out what that means for the economy. It's a moving feast as the virus gets worse and worse and worse, and therefore the likely impact on the economy seems to be getting worse. Where it's now really escalating is the impact on financial markets. So financial markets are starting to show signs of stress. For example, today, interest rates on New Zealand government bonds actually rose. So New Zealand government is planning to borrow extra money for this package.
Well, they're borrowing it all.
They've announced an extra $3 billion, literally to be issued on Thursday. But at the same time, there's nobody out there who really wants to purchase government bonds because investors around the world are really running for cash. So financial markets are getting stressed, and that's adding a new dimension to the potential economic impact of this.
Tali, what are you most worried about in the next few weeks? So, for example, we've got down in Dunedin a case where potentially a schoolboy is showing symptoms of COVID-19. There is a suggestion if he's positive, a school would have to close for a couple of days. I mean, what are the implications for workers in that instance? You know, you're talking about, say, caregivers having to stay at home and look after sick people, and it seems it's always those people in the most tenuous jobs who are affected most significantly in these kinds of times, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really important that employers are coming forward now to say to people, to caregivers in that situation, you will be covered, you won't lose your income. I think that's critical, and that's what parents need to hear right now. And I think that's one of the major questions that is coming forward from retail workers right now, is this issue around employers not telling them what their entitlements are, not paying attention to the very unique situation that we're in right now, where people do need their incomes continued.
Do you know of employers who are doing that they're giving workers a rough ride? Because we're hearing that everybody's kind of on the same page. Talk to your boss, talk it out.
No. So what we're seeing consistently is even when senior management and companies have the right idea about what to do, it's not flowing through to frontline management. So frontline management is saying to people, no, you can't go off work sick until you give me a medical certificate. And on the other hand, the Ministry of Health is saying, don't go to your doctor, call Healthline. You know, people were stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Phil, I'm wondering, obviously the government is saying that fiscal responsibility rules, they've got some rubber in them now, they're going to stretch depending on what is required. During the global financial crisis, borrowing was about 30% of GDP, it's about 18.5% here. What do you think business is comfortable in terms of pushing that out? How far can we go before there's trouble on the horizon?
Well, there's two matters there. One is businesses got to have confidence that the people doing the borrowing are going to be capable of turning it around and making sure that the economy gets healthy, stays healthy, and we're all more prosperous 2 years out from this event. So, I think they have a confidence in Grant Robertson to be able to do that for the time being. We'll see how that plays out. But also they'll be wanting to make sure, this is to points made earlier, that the money that's being spent here is being spent for the right purposes and it's being targeted properly, and that the right outcomes are coming out of it. Now, of course, business people are human beings as well. They'll be, if there's a bit of free money going around, they'll put their hands out for it potentially. But I think most people, which is why I think you'll get a good reaction to what's going on today, most people understand that a measured response is the right response. And I think businesses will give credit to the government for that, and they'll also look to the opposition to say, well, what are you going to do? What would you do better? So that coming into an election that I still understand is being held in September, they'll be able to make the right choices.
So, Dominic, what do you think is the sweet spot for debt for us?
Well, let's be clear here. So, as you say, debt to GDP at the moment is about 18.5%. On this package, it's going to be rising at 2 to 3 percentage points per quarter.
Right.
So, if the virus is disruptive for a year, the wage package stays in place for a year, we'll be at 30 within 1 year. It's really a very sharp increase in debt. I think there is no sweet spot. Actually, what I would say is now is the time for government to borrow. Now is the time that the government safety net is required. I recall last year people were talking about the government, fiscal straitjacket and the government needs to borrow and spend. I never agreed with that, and I hope those people are really taking a good hard look at themselves now, because the government's responsibility to date is what's left us in a great position to use that flexibility and use the
we're digging into the rainy day fund.
This is the rainy day fund. We saved for the rainy day. Now is the rainy day. Now is the time to spend. So 30% of GDP, if that's where we get to in a year, that's nothing. It's really low.
What if it goes on for more than a year? Because obviously Australia has put out its business stimulus package, and the Prime Minister there says, I'm looking out 3 years. So should we be looking out 3 years too?
Yeah, if it goes on for more than a year, if it's this disruptive for more than a year, I don't think... I'm not sure what the epidemiologists are saying, but if the economic disruption lasted that long, there could be a little bit of trouble.
Tali, obviously the minimum wage increase is going to go ahead. Do you support that? Do the businesses that you're workers with, can they afford that? The little retailer that you say is feeling the burn right now, can they afford to bump up wages?
So absolutely, the minimum wage increase needs to go ahead. We need to ensure that all Kiwis are on livable incomes, whether they're on a benefit or whether they're on the minimum wage and working. So for us, this is absolutely critical. And in fact, most of the employers which we negotiate with pay much more than the minimum wage. So
this idea that potentially it could push some operators to the wall at a very tough time, you don't buy into that?
Well, I think the whole purpose of the government's package today is to support those businesses if they are going to struggle to, keep their employees on. This is their opportunity to get a bit of a helping hand from the government.
Phil, what do you think of that, going ahead with the minimum wage increase come April?
Oh, it was a nice piece of rhetoric, wasn't it? This government was never going to stop putting the minimum wage up. That's what's been a core political promise for them. I think it will cost jobs, but it was never going to work out any differently. And I think Talia's right. What the government's done in terms of giving these kinds of wage subsidies will hopefully assuage some of that blow. Of course, the challenge gets a lot harder as you move out. I mean, if we're still in this situation, even in 6 months' time, I know everybody's being very staunch right now and very supportive of the travel bans and all the rest of it. In 6 months' time, that's going to get pretty tiresome and pretty wearisome, and a lot of sad stories out in the media, including, no doubt, on Checkpoint about employers and workers losing incomes and losing jobs and so on, and the government will wear some of that blame. So, the hard work, in a sense, starts for the government right now to attempt to keep ahead of the curve about staying ahead of public perception and retaining public support, because it's easy to say right now we support everything that's going on. It's going to be a bit harder in the middle of a cold winter when you feel very restricted in your movements and your business is still struggling.
Phil, on that note, looking at some of the finer print around the $126 million pot of money that is for the isolation fund, right? We get a bit of an insight there because we see the numbers that they're basing the size of that fund on. And they say that is based on 27,000 workers taking it up every 2 weeks for 8 weeks. So if you do the maths, they're talking about 110,000 workers. What does that mean for businesses? Because that isn't the worst case scenario. That's just our working scenario, and the finance minister says could be worse than that.
Well, it'll mean a huge loss of productivity. The idea that we're all going to sort of sit at home and pat the cat and watch a bit of Netflix sounds kind of alluring for the time being, but doesn't actually work out well for the economy, of course. So, and the idea that suddenly we'll all be home working and apparently, opening up our laptops and getting on with work, it just doesn't work out quite like that, of course. So there will be a knock to business and business confidence and productivity in the economy and output in the economy as a result of all of that. I don't think any business person who's worth their salt will say in any way that shouldn't occur. Of course it shouldn't, because the alternative is to close the country down, as they are in Italy and increasingly in France, and nobody wants that outcome. So I think employers will support it in principle, but the point I'm making is that just politically and socially and in a community sense, that all starts to get a bit hard, and it gets a bit hard for the government politically too, as well as for business people.
Yeah, so Dominic, productivity is got to take a dive, even if we're all supposed to be sitting at home working madly away on our computers. There's plenty of sectors where that is just not possible. I can't make widgets in my garage, eh? So Dominic, what do you reckon is going to happen in terms of that?
Oh, absolutely. Productivity is going to take a dive. I mean, if companies have been asked to hold people, basically they're being subsidised to hold their staff on when they don't actually have any business to do, so staff aren't going to have a lot to do. I think the question is, in this environment, as we head through, cash is king. How long can businesses actually hold on? Governments have eased things a little bit there and enabled them to hold on, but the longer this goes on for, the greater the chance that we actually end up with disruptive business failures and disruptive people becoming dislocated from the labour market, which could be more scarring for the economy in the long run. That's what the government wants to avoid here, and I think they are going about it roughly the right way.
Tali, are you hearing anything from businesses out there who say they are about to shut their doors, or even, planning for the worst case scenario? So we spoke to Sky City today, more than 5,000 workers there. They are planning and hoping they don't need it, but planning for the fact that they may need to shut the doors at the casino at some point. I mean, that would have a significant effect on a large chunk of workers. Are you anticipating other big employers may be facing that scenario?
Yes, I mean, potentially. We really don't know how this is all going to play out, and there could be massive, redundancies on the cards, and that's why it's so important that the government is working on, big businesses and how they might support them in the future, as well as the smaller, medium enterprises for now. But I think the important point too is that right now we're already hearing from businesses sort of saying, oh, well, we're going to need to cut hours, or we're going to need to make redundancies, but not providing any evidence as to why. And it feels like some employers are exploiting the situation to think about how they might actually just boost their profits rather than actually any concern for workers and the situation we're in right now, where we actually need to keep people in employment and with an income.
Phil, given that obviously the government's had a big spend up today and they've got the budget, they would have had to sort of readjust things and will still be readjusting things. What do you think we can expect in terms of them sticking to some of their other key priorities like housing and also raising children out of poverty?
Well, if you like, take those two things just that you've mentioned. In terms of taking kids out of poverty, I can't think of much more useful work that the government could do right now than keeping their parents employed. If you've got a large unemployment, well, that's going to immediately push a whole bunch of kids into poverty. So I think the trick is to think about how they might use what they're doing right now and what they will do in the budget, because they'll hopefully bring forward a bunch of infrastructure projects. They'll try and get spades in the ground just as quickly as they can. For example, on the roading stuff they announced the other day, I think all of that can very easily be put into a well-being framework. It can very easily be put into a keeping children out of poverty and building more houses and so on, in the context of the shock that we've just seen over the last few weeks, and in the context of us trying to claw our way out from a once in a generation shock of this kind. So my sense is the budget will be able to be put in those terms, and I see the Minister talking a bit about that today because he wants to set himself for that outcome.
Dominic, you say you've got new forecasts coming out. Can you give us a bit of a taster?
Yeah, well, sort of 2 to 3% drop in GDP in a single quarter, as we discussed before. The unemployment rate.
Yes.
So we were working on that today. Look, I think.
So we're about 4% at the moment.
We're about 4% at the moment. During the global financial crisis, we lifted to 6.5%. It turned out to be not such a bad outcome at that time. I think in the absence of this package, we would have been forecasting something like similar to the global financial crisis. As it is, with this package, I think the unemployment rate will lift to around about 5.5%. Now, that's still 45,000 people, additional unemployed people. Additional unemployed people on top of the 4% already. However, it's not nearly as severe as it could have been without this package. And I think that Phil's right, you could put this into a wellbeing framework. I think this package was necessary to prevent a really bad outcome for the economy. Right. With this package, we keep things orderly, we keep things from really unravelling, and it's an absolute requirement for the well-being of people. It's a sort of a minimum requirement.
Tali, last word to you. What do the workers need right now? Anything more than what's been offered today, what would be your top priority?
The top priority would be increasing paid sick leave so that people are not incentivised to come to work sick. That's a national health issue. 5 days. Yep. Correct. There needs to be some legislation regarding redundancy compensation. I'm very concerned that a large number of companies still don't have redundancy compensation, and if there are going to be redundancies resulting, then that will matter a great deal. And further, that there needs to be individualisation of benefits, because at the moment people are not going to be able to access benefits if their partner earns a certain amount of money. Those should be individualised just the same way that the subsidies are going to be individualised for supporting people taking self-isolation. It should be the same for benefits.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this evening. That was Dominic Stevens, who's the Chief Economist with Westpac, Tali Williams, who was joining us there from the union, and also Phil O'Reilly, who's a business consultant down the line in our studio in Wellington. Thank you all for being with us today. That is the day that the government announced a $12.1 billion rescue package for business, including $5.1 billion of that going to wage subsidies, and a massive pot of cash for people to draw on if they are in self-isolation, around $126 million. Their beneficiaries will also get a bump, $25 extra a week, and on top of that, the $10 that was scheduled to come into play on April 1st. The minimum wage will go ahead, that wage increase will go ahead as well on the 1st of April, and the Finance Minister says this is just the start. He is reserving the right to come out with further interventions before his budget in May. Thanks for being with us. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News at 7. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. 2 tourists from Southeast Asia are in custody after failing to comply with self-isolation. Immigration New Zealand says the pair arrived yesterday. It says they're liable for deportation but must remain in New Zealand for the remainder of the isolation period. And the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says a woman who arrived in Christchurch yesterday will also be deported after refusing to self-isolate.
That person has been found and still appears to be unwilling, so the intention is therefore to deport that person.
Ashley Bloomfield says spot checks on people in quarantine began today. Dr Bloomfield says the 3 new COVID-19 cases announced today have all recently returned from overseas. 2 are in Wellington, a man in his 70s and his son, who is in his 30s, who were in the United States. The other